If they were like full on crazy, doing things that don't make sense, but they think it does make sense, like that's upsetting. But then to be doing something that you know doesn't make sense and yet you can't stop yourself, like that seems all the more terrifying. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft, published in 1927, and I'm comparing it with Color Out of Space, directed by Richard Stanley, released in 2019. And I recently mentioned Richard Stanley in my video for The Island of Dr. Moreau because for the 1996 adaptation, Richard Stanley was originally supposed to direct that, and he did a lot of work preparing the film before ultimately getting kicked off. And Color Out of Space is actually the first film he directed since that whole Dr. Moreau debacle. And with Color Out of Space, both book and movie are about a meteor that crashes onto a man's farm, bringing cosmic horror with it. And both book and movie are very creepy, very disturbing. And honestly, the movie was a bit too much for me at times. I love reading cosmic horror, and I love reading horror in general, with some exceptions. However, when I actually see it play out on screen, sometimes it can just be too scary and too disturbing to visually see it. And with this movie in particular, the night after I watched it, that night in bed, I did wake up at one point during the night and I started thinking about the movie, and I did get a bit creeped out, but then I was able to fall back asleep. And then since then I haven't thought about it, and this was 5 days ago. So some movies are so creepy and so scary that it lingers for days, and I get night sweats because I'm so scared. So that was not this movie, thankfully. But nonetheless, there is a certain aspect we will get to that was just a bit too much for me still. But if you love horror, then you should definitely watch this movie and you should read the book. And Lovecraft is an icon in the horror genre, and there is even a term Lovecraftian, which is used to describe when books and movies do something that is reminiscent of Lovecraft. And cosmic horror too, I don't know if he came up with cosmic horror, but he is definitely one of the original cosmic horror writers, I believe. And yeah, I absolutely loved this book so much. I highlighted so many different sections because I just love the way it was written. And like I said, it was just so effective, so creepy, so disturbing, so unsettling, and so vivid. And this is actually only my second H.P. Lovecraft book I have read. I also read Shadow Over Innsmouth, which I also loved. But I do want to mention too that Lovecraft was a racist and a xenophobe, and that is reflected in his work at times, such as Shadow Over Innsmouth. However, in Color Out of Space, I didn't notice anything like that, so it seems like this one was just good old-fashioned horror. But from here on out, I'm going to be getting into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So beginning with the characters, the book is told from the perspective of a unnamed surveyor who is checking out this land because there's going to be a dam or an aqueduct, or there's something going to be put in place here. And so he's coming to survey the land and check it out. And he gets this bad vibe in the area, and he hears bits and pieces about something strange that had happened there in the 1880s. However, no one will talk about it. And they say that the one person who will talk about it is the crazy old man, Ami Pierce. And so the surveyor seeks out Ami Pierce because he wants to hear the details. And so Pierce tells him the story, and then the story is then told to the reader. Whereas in the movie, there is the surveyor named Ward, and he does have voiceover at the start of the movie as well as the end. However, the movie isn't told from his perspective, and he is just someone who shows up at integral stages, but he's not a continuous person in the story, which same with the book, right? Because the surveyor, once he is telling us Ami's story, he is no longer part of the story because he wasn't there for it. But that's another change though, is because with Ward in the movie, when he is there surveying the land is when the meteor falls, so he sees it all firsthand. And there is no Ami Pierce in the movie, although there is a cop named Pierce. But yeah, so the way it's told is different because it is happening right now in the movie. And also the man whose farm the meteor lands on, his name is slightly different in book and movie. In the book, his name is Nahum Gardner, whereas in the movie it is Nathan Gardner. And I'm assuming Nahum is an old-fashioned way of saying the name Nathan. But also in the book, Nahum has a wife and 3 sons, whereas in the movie he has a wife, 2 sons. The older one is Benny, the younger one is Jack, and then 1 daughter whose name is Lavinia. Also, I'm holding my dog. She's kind of misbehaving, so I have her in my lap. But isn't she so cute? We got her in September, so she's still a puppy. But in the movie, Lavinia is into witchcraft, whereas there is no witchcraft in the book. And in the movie, we also get a backstory with the wife. We find out that she'd had cancer and she had surgery for that cancer 6 months prior to the events of this movie. And we also learned that Nathan was raised by a like abusive dad, like for sure verbally abusive. I don't know if he was physically abusive, but so he was raised by this abusive father. And so he kind of has that hanging over him, but he himself seems to be a great dad and husband regardless. And then also we find out that they have like semi-recently moved to the country. They had originally lived in the city, and we know Lavinia does not like it here and she wants to go back to the city. And it also seems like the wife doesn't love it either, because she's like some kind of stockbroker and they have a horrible internet connection, and so her business is doing terribly out in the country. So the wife and daughter for sure seem to be struggling. With the sons, it's unclear. I don't really know whether they liked the city or not, but it definitely seems like this had been a dream of Nathan's to buy this land and get alpacas and live out in the country. And so to talk about the meteor, so first of all, like I said, the surveyor in the book, once he gets to this area, like he just feels something is off. And I want to share what he says in the book. The place is not good for imagination and does not bring restful dreams at night. Upon everything was a haze of restlessness and oppression, a touch of the unreal and the grotesque, as if some vital element of perspective were awry. And then after he talks to Omni and Omni tells him the whole story, he is then rushing to get back to his hotel because he doesn't feel safe, and he says, at least not when the sinister stars are out. And yeah, like I said, I just love the descriptions in this book. And then also calling stars sinister, like I always think of the night sky and the stars as something just like so beautiful and incredible. So then to be told a story where you're fearful of the stars and what could be coming out of the sky is just so unique. And then also, as we'll get into, like having a color. Obviously the color is like an alien entity, but referring to it as a color that is just so unfamiliar and so unknown and so strange, and it's this color that's causing these things. That too is just such a cool idea. Also, this top is sparkly and I wore this because it kind of reminds me of the night sky. But yeah, so the meteor, it lands on the Gardner farm, and like I said, in both book and movie, it emits a color that they have just like never seen before and they don't know how to describe. And in the book we read, it displayed shining bands unlike any known colors of the normal spectrum. There was much breathless talk of new elements, bizarre optical properties, and other things which puzzled men of science are wont to say when faced by the unknown. And in both, they have like city officials come check out the meteor. And in the book, like people like professors, scientists from the city come in and they take samples, but the samples like get smaller and smaller. And it seems like it like also caused a test tube to disappear or something too. Whereas in the movie, people come out to see the meteor, like a cop and the mayor, and then the news station comes out at one point. However, in the movie, they don't really care that much about the meteor. Whereas, like I said, in the book, they were taking samples and were more interested. And also it's interesting because in the book, it does talk about a smell coming from the meteor, and Lovecraft uses the word miasma to describe it, which miasma means like an unpleasant smell. And things like that, like, wow, like that's such a cool word to describe the smell. Like I just loved it. In the movie, Nathan is the only one who notices a smell from the meteor, and he says later that it smells like his father's hospital room before he died, like it smells like cancer and it smells like death. But yeah, he's the only one who smells it. And in the book, the gardeners talk about like weird things that are happening on their property. Like they say like the animals aren't this right size and the look, and they move weird, and they're just going through these changes, like the rabbits and things that are running around the property. And then also the son claims to like see trees moving in the wind when there is no wind, so they're just swaying for no reason. But everybody can see that, like I think this happens in like wintertime or something, but like the snow melts much faster on Nahum's property, and then they start growing these like large strange colored plants, and then like spring comes early and his crops arrive early. However, and the crops are also like enlarged, however they are inedible. And so these are things that like everybody can see, and so clearly something is going on. But then the townspeople end up like shunning the Gardner family because they are superstitious and they see something's wrong and they just don't trust him and they avoid him. Whereas the city officials, when he tells them about what's going on, like the scientists, they just laugh and don't believe him, and they're like, oh, he's just like some dumb hick farmer, what does he know, he's crazy. And so you have the townspeople who are too superstitious and therefore avoid him, and then you have the city people aren't superstitious enough or like are too disbelieving, and so they don't give him the time of day for that reason. And in the movie, we also see like the strange colored plants that are growing on the property, and their crops do come in early, however they are inedible. And then in both, they are told not to drink the water from the well, but of course in both versions they're drinking it anyway. And in the movie, we also get a scene where Nathan is taking a shower and like this strange thing forms in the water. And in the movie, we do see like I said, the mayor just is could care less about the meteor, which, by the way, I forgot to mention that like the next day in both book and movie, the meteor has just vanished and it's no longer there. But in the movie, we do see a news station come interview Nathan, and similar to the book, the news station just doesn't believe him, partly because at this point the meteor has disappeared. And so the news station just makes him seem like some dumb farmer who's probably drunk and hallucinating. So a similar thing with book and movie where you have like the city people disbelieving Nathan. And then in both book and movie, we see how this color drives the Gardner family crazy, but there are some differences between the two. So I'm just going to talk about them separately, beginning with the book. So Mrs. Gardner is the first one in the book to go crazy, and the way she is described is just so unnerving, so I'm going to share a section of it. In her raving, there was not a single specific noun, but only verbs and pronouns. Things moved and changed and fluttered, and ears tingled to impulses which were not wholly sound. Something was taken away. She was being drained of something. Something was fastening itself on her that ought not to be. Nahum did not send her to the county asylum, but let her wander about the house as long as she was harmless to herself and others. Even when her expression changed, he did nothing. But when the boys grew afraid of her and the deist nearly fainted at the way she made faces at him, he decided to keep her locked in the attic. By July, she had ceased to speak and crawled on all fours, and before that month was over, Nahum got the mad notion that she was slightly luminous in the dark, as he now clearly saw was the case with the nearby vegetation. And then their son Thaddeus also then goes crazy. He goes to visit the well, and then he comes back and he's acting just as strange as the mom had been, and so ultimately he ends up locking him in like an attic room across from the mother's room, and we read, "The way they screamed at each other behind their locked doors was very terrible, especially to little Merwin, who fancied they talked in some terrible language that was not of earth." And then Thaddeus eventually dies. It doesn't really directly say like how he dies, but he dies. And then his other two sons disappear. And it is assumed that like the well was involved because the well is what made Thaddeus go crazy, and so they know something is off with that. And then eventually Ami, he hasn't heard from the Gardners for like a few weeks, so he decides to go check up on them. And when he shows up, like a lot of the farm is just like brittle and crumbling and gray, and he goes inside and Nahum is like talking as if his family is there in the room with him, but they're not. It's just him. And so Ami is just like, oh, like what is happening? And then he's asking about the wife, like where's she at? And then basically he like finds out she's up in the attic, so he goes to check in on her. And it doesn't get specific as to like what she looks like or the changes that went on with her, but needless to say, she has become just like some kind of horrifying creature. And the book reads, "There are things which cannot be mentioned, and what is done in common humanity is sometimes cruelly judged by the law. I gathered that no living thing was left in the attic room, and that to leave anything capable of motion there would have been a deed so monstrous as to damn any accountable being to eternal torment." And then once he comes downstairs after presumably killing what was left of Mrs. Gardner, he then sees Nahum, and Nahum is like starting to get like brittle and gray and like crumbling the way his farm is, but he is still like there enough that he can talk. And so he's talking to Ami about the color. And I highlighted a section I wanted to share, but it's written in like their accent. I'm going to do my best to read it, but it's just kind of hard to read because of the way it's written, but I still think it's a really interesting section, so I still want to read it anyway. So he says of the color, "It beats down your mind and then gets ye, burns ye up, and the well water, you was right about that, evil water. Zenas never came back from the well, can't get away, draws ye. You know something's coming but tain't no use. Where's Nabby, Ami? My head's no good. Don't know how long since I fed her. It'll get her if we ain't careful. Just a color. Her face is getting to have that color sometimes towards night, and it burns and sucks, and it comes someplace where things ain't as they are here. One of 'em professor said so. He was right. Look out, Ami, it'll do something more. Sucks the life out." And then from there, Nahum just like crumbles away. And so then Ami leaves and he gets people from town to come and see what has happened. And so when they show up, they're, looking at the property and like what is left of Mr. and Mrs. Gardner. And then Ami, like he knows something is up with the well, right? And that was the source of a lot of strangeness. And so he mentioned this to the men, and then they like take all of the water out of the well. And as they are taking the water out, they do find the remains of the other sons there in the well, as well as some animals. And the men are later inside the house, and then from the well, they see the color like coming out of the well and spiraling up into the sky. And we read, "It had a very queer color, and as the men clustered around the window, Ami gave a violent start, for this strange beam of ghastly miasma was to him no unfamiliar hue. He had seen that color before, and feared to think what it might mean. He had seen it in the nasty brittle globule in the aerolite 2 summers ago, had seen it in the crazy vegetation of the springtime, and had thought he had seen it for an instant that very morning against the small barred window of that terrible attic room where nameless things happened. All All the while, the shaft of phosphorescence from the well was getting brighter and brighter, bringing to the minds of the huddled men a sense of doom and abnormality which far outraced any image their conscious minds could form. It was no longer shining out, it was pouring out. And as the shapeless stream of unplaceable color left the well, it seemed to flow directly into the sky. And so as this is happening, suddenly Ami's horse dies, but also the men are like freaked out, and so they hurry and leave the farm. And ever since this night, no one else will talk about what had happened on the gardener's property aside from Ami. But even him, like for a while after, he wouldn't say anything. But then by the time the surveyor comes around, it's been like over 40 years. And so he is now at a point where he does talk about it. And as I just read in that quote, he talks about like having seen the color that, 2 summers ago or whatever. So in the book, the events on the farm take place over like a year, like over a year. Whereas in the movie, everything takes place like in just a few days. So to move on to the movie. So the movie does such a great job of showing just like of how out of their minds the Gardner family is. Like sometimes they act in a way that makes sense, right? Like when they're obviously disturbed by something that they should be disturbed by, or like when they're stating like something weird is happening, like we need to get off this farm. Obviously that's like a rational way to respond. But other times they are just like acting crazy and doing things that don't make sense. And I also kind of think that to some extent they know they're doing something that doesn't make sense, and yet they can't stop themselves. And I feel like if they were like full on crazy, doing things that don't make sense, but they think it does make sense, like that's upsetting. But then to be doing something that doesn't make sense, and yet you can't stop yourself, like that seems all the more terrifying. But even when they're doing something that doesn't make sense, it makes sense that they're doing something that doesn't seem logical because the color is getting in their brains and they are not thinking clearly. And the movie just captures like this trippy, weird way they're thinking so well. And Nicolas Cage does play Nathan Gardner, and we do get some classic Cage rage scenes, which I absolutely love Nicolas Cage. He's such an amazing actor. But the scene when he's like throwing the tomatoes in the trash because they're inedible, and then the scene when he's like upset in the car because the car won't start, and then there's another scene where he's getting mad at his daughter, and he's kind of using his Vampire's Kiss voice in that scene. And Richard Stanley, he was a huge fan of Vampire's Kiss, so he did ask Nicolas Cage to like, bring some of that style of acting to this movie. So if you're a fan of Vampire's Kiss, you will definitely like see bits of that in this performance as well. But as in the book, the farm, starts to grow strange plants and the creatures get really weird. And in the movie, the creatures get like really weird. It's not like subtle weird changes. Like they look very creepy looking. And then one night, so the family is being, influenced by the color and has already started acting strange. And so it's nighttime, but like a lot of the family is awake. And the two sons, Benny and Jack, are sitting out on the porch, just like looking over the change that has come across their farm. And they like notice something in the barn. So then they go check out the barn where the alpacas are, and they see that the color is like infecting the alpacas. And then the color comes after them and they try to run away, and Benny gets away. But then by this point, the mother has woken up, and so she sees the color coming after her sons. And so she runs after Jack. And once she reaches Jack, the color also reaches them. And so they are like struck by the color, and this event causes them to be fused together. And so eventually they put like the mom/Jack being in the attic. And so while the family's in the attic, Nathan then he goes to go shoot the alpacas, which have at this point like blended together into this weird creature. So he shoots them, and then he comes back up to the attic with his gun, and he tells, Lavinia and Benny, like, go downstairs, I'm going to take care of this. And Lavinia is very upset that he is going to shoot the mom Jack creature, and she doesn't want him to, but he like makes her leave. But in my mind, I was just like, yes, please, like shoot them. Like clearly they are beyond hope. They are disgusting. There is no saving them. And like she is like trying to reabsorb Jack, and it's just so gross and gross noises. So I was just like, finally, like, Nathan, you are thinking right. Like, just put him out of their misery, But anyway, once he's alone, he has his gun, but then he can't do it, and he ends up kissing her instead. But from here, Lavinia and Benny, they have moments of insanity, but then they are sane enough to be like, we need to get out of here. And while they are preparing to leave the farm, Benny then is just like, oh, like our dog, he's in the well, I need to go save him. And so he starts climbing down the well, which obviously you're like, what? Like, what are you doing? No. But obviously he's not thinking straight. And of course, once he is down within the well, like the color comes up and gets him. And while Lavinia is watching this happen, Nathan then comes up behind her and he grabs her, and he is talking about like putting her up in the attic with her mom, and she is like begging him not to, which it's funny because not that long ago, she was like wanting to stay with the mom and telling him like, don't kill her. And now suddenly she's like, no, like I don't want to be in there with her. But eventually he does like, shove her in the room, and he shuts the door and he's like, feed your mother. But meanwhile, while all this drama is happening on the farm. Ward, the water surveyor, he is in the city, and the cop Pierce shows him like, hey, like we've been finding these strange animals, and he shows them the animals in this truck, and Ward recognizes like one of the cats that had been on the land, and so he's like, we need to go to the gardener's property right now. And he is the one that had told them not to drink the water because he could see something was off with it. So he knows like that weird things are happening there. And so they go to the gardener's farm, and Nathan, similar to the book, he is acting like things are normal, but he is clearly crazy, and he has this gross arm infection, and he's talking about his family as if they are there with him, even though they are not. But then when he talks about Benny, he's like, oh, Benny lives in the well now, which is something that Nahum had said of his son in the book too. From here, they then go up to the attic, and Lavinia is like being attacked by the mom, but like right in the nick of time, Nathan actually comes up behind Ward and Pierce, and he shoots the mom. And then from there, they go outside because the well is getting crazy with all of this color. And then Nathan is standing behind Ward, and he pulls a gun out. I wasn't sure why. Like at first I was like, is he going to try to shoot the well? But then Pierce was behind Nathan, and Pierce thought Nathan was going to shoot Ward. I don't know if he was or not, but anyway, Pierce ends up shooting Nathan because he thinks he's going to shoot Ward. And so Lavinia is crying, upset that they like have shot her father, and so she's like crying over his body, and Ward is like, we need to get out of here, you need to come with us. But she's like, no, this is my home now, I'm staying. Which, remember, she had like hated living there at the start of this movie and wanted to leave, but now she's like, you know, I can't leave, it's my home. And so then Pierce, he ends up getting killed by a tree, and then when Ward does return to Lavinia, she is at the well, and similar to the book, the well, the color is like spiraling up to the sky, and Lavinia is like infected with the color. And then we like get a shot, like it's like they get like a vision of the planet that the color comes from. And then from here, it's just like insanity, and Lavinia like explodes with color, and then the time is getting so weird, and Ward, he goes inside the house to escape, but then inside the house are like hallucinations of the family, the Gardner family, and Nathan Gardner is trying to attack Ward, and so Ward goes into the basement, and while he's down in the basement, the house like explodes into the gray dust, the way it does in the book. And so that's how it ends. But I did want to mention Ezra. He is exclusive to the movie. He is like this hippie stoner that lives on the Gardner property, and he is played by Tommy Chong. And Ward visits Ezra 3 different times throughout this movie, and the third time he visits is with Pierce, the cop, and when they show up, Ezra is dead, but he had recorded like his discoveries of the color, and a lot of what he says in this recording comes from the dialogue of what Nahum said to Ami in the book. And the recording is obviously very distorted and weird and creepy sounding, and it is after leaving Ezra's shack that Pierce is then like grabbed by a tree and he dies. But I wanted to mention The Shining because I was definitely getting Shining book and movie vibes from this movie. So for one, when the meteor lands, Jack, the son, is sitting in the hallway, and he has like the silent scream, which is very similar to a scene we have in The Shining where Danny has that same thing. And also his name is Jack, and the name of the father in The Shining was Jack. And then also Nathan, he has this abusive father like hanging over his head, and he does not want to become like this man. And yet when he is under the influence of the color, he does become like this bad father and this mean person, becoming the thing he like most in the world does not want to be, you know? And the same thing happens with The Shining, where when Jack is under the influence of the Overlook, he becomes like his father who was abusive. But when it comes to book versus movie, so even with the changes, like the movie also takes place in modern day, I thought this was a great adaptation of the book. Like the beginning with the voiceover and the ending wasn't necessary, and I feel like they could have changed the very beginning and the very end. Like it was kind of cheesy with having Ward talking right there, but overall, like I didn't have issues with the acting, and I love Nicolas Cage, of course, but even the others, I thought they were fine. I saw other people complain about the performances, but I honestly didn't really have an issue with it. And I do think it stays true to the book overall. Like the overall plot is the same, and it also stays true to like the vibe, you know, of the book, and it just really delivers on that cosmic horror, and also just like the trippiness of it, right? And like there's a scene where Benny is talking about what the color does and how it distorts your perceptions of time and space, and how like the closer you are to almost like a black hole, like you get sucked into it, whether it's like mentally or literally, and just how unsettling all of that was. So it captures it visually as well as, again, just the trippiness of it, which I can't think of a better word. But while this isn't like a 5-star movie, like it gave me nearly everything I wanted. And then of course the book by Lovecraft was amazing, and I was just spellbound the whole time I was reading it. And there were times where he wouldn't offer descriptions, like he would be very vague, saying things like, it began to undergo loathsome changes which no one could explain, or that terrible attic room where nameless things had happened. So it seems like a cop-out when it's like, oh, horrible nameless things. However, that didn't annoy me as much as it may have in a different book, because for the most part, this book is just so like viscerally vivid in the way it talks about things. And so, and at times, sometimes the lack of description, there's just so much atmosphere to this book that even when there's a lack of description, you still like get the vibe, and it's still just so creepy and unsettling, even if he's not saying exactly why and what it looks like, you know? So I just, like I said, I highlighted so much because the way this was written was just so rich and vivid. So I feel like in most cases, a lot of writers can't get away with being like, oh, it's unexplainable. Like, no, explain it. But again, Lovecraft is such a great writer that when he did have those sections, like it worked. And yeah, when it comes to book versus movie, as much as I really did like the movie and I thought it was a great adaptation, and like I said, it delivered everything I wanted it to, nonetheless, I will say the book wins because this really was just so fantastic. I highly recommend it. And if you love it, you should definitely watch the movie afterwards. I did hear a lot of people compare the movie to Mandy, which is like another like trippy horror movie from 2018, which also stars Nicolas Cage. And people say Mandy is better, but I've never seen Mandy. So I guess that works to my benefit because I have nothing to compare Color Out of Space to. I mean, other cosmic horror, but I guess Mandy is just very similar in some ways. But yeah, I've never seen it. And yeah, that wraps it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts down below in the comments. What is your favorite H.P. Lovecraft story? If you have read a lot, definitely let me know what your favorites are. If you have seen this movie, let me know your thoughts. Also, just your favorite cosmic horror book. I have read a number of them. You know, Jeff Vandermeer has some that are like that. And then The Fisherman by John Langan. I know I've read others, but those are the only two I can think of right now. But yeah, also like Our Wives Under the Sea kind of has that vibe as well. But yeah, comment your cosmic horror suggestions down below in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on Nicolas Cage too. He's such an amazing actor. And even though he has been in so many movies, very few of them are based on books. But I have covered Matchstick Men and Joe, which is fantastic. And then I did mention him in my Dracula video because I mentioned Renfield, where he plays Dracula in that movie. And I think that's it. So really, it's only been like 2 official book first movie videos, aside from this one, which is now my 3rd. But I will go ahead and link to my video for Matchstick Men. I do love that movie. I highly recommend it. But yeah, I will link to Matchstick Men here on the screen if you want more Nicolas Cage content. And I still have my puppy here. She's been good in my lap. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.